Hi there. Welcome to the State of the Nation. And what a way to kick off 2022 with an analyst that I've been dying to get onto this platform for a while now. He did, to my mind, some of the best analysis around the local government election. A lecturer at the University of Johannesburg, works for the Mapungubwe Institute for Strategic Reflection. It's the one and only Professor Mcebisi Mdletsana. Prof, welcome to the State of the Nation.
Thank you, Mike.
And boy, it never stops in South Africa. There's always something going on.
Quite a noisy country, very opinionated.
Yes, definitely a lot going on. And of course, if we can kick off with the thing that's dominating the news just at the moment, talking about lots of opinions. Our Minister of Tourism, Lindiwe Sisulu, despite being in the cabinet for close on 28 years, decided that she didn't like the Constitution. And that she said that judges are house Negroes and blacks have got colonial minds, and basically everybody's bad except for her. What's your take on what Minister Sisulu had to say?
Well, it's the kind of posturing that one has come to expect from the ANC. In the period leading to the elective conferences. People fake reputations and take positions that are at odds completely with who they are and what we have known them to be. He's not the first one to do it. She's not the first one to do it. Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma did the same thing as well. She pretended to be a radical when we had known her to be more like a Thabo Mbeki clone. Very moderate, very measured, and thoughtful in her public statements, in her policy positions. But because she wanted to be president, there was a certain faction within the ANC that felt that they'd been nudged out. People were unhappy about all sorts of things. So she faked this radical posture to exploit that unhappiness and also to open doors. At times, we tend to forget that politics is employment for a number of people. It's a source of livelihood. And so, people take all sorts of positions in order to get jobs, even though they may not even believe in those positions. So Lindiwe is following an example that has already been set up by Dlamini Zuma. She doesn't believe in any of the things, I think, that she says. Lindiwe is not known in the ANC to be a thoughtful person, a person who articulates views and write papers. She doesn't have that reputation. Even in cabinet, she would not necessarily be counted amongst the hard-working ministers. And of course, I mean, in her two articles, there are a lot of falsehoods, there are a lot of exaggerated claims. To say that the Constitution is not advancing a progressive agenda is nonsense. Because it is because of the Constitution that a lot of things have been done, provision of HIV/AIDS, because the Constitution guarantees access to health, water, shelter.
Yes.
And so when people, way back, when Thabo Mbeki was not big on providing drugs to counter HIV/AIDS, people went to court demanding that right on the basis of the Constitution. The reason why you can't evict people willy-nilly from housing or rental housing is because of the Constitution, that you have to be considerate. So there's quite a number of things that this Constitution was drafted by very thoughtful, progressive people. So, to say that the Constitution is a restraint on that, and to say that judges that have made judgments have a colonized mind is equally nonsensical.
Yeah.
In fact, one of the things that Judge Moseneke said, I remember giving a lecture at Mistra celebrating 20th anniversary of our democracy, was that whilst he was in the Constitutional Court, he waited eagerly for a case against a property owner, for instance, who had refused to give up land that government was demanding for purposes of expropriation. Remember, the Constitution all along has said the state can expropriate.
Yes.
That exercise will be determined, will be overseen by the state. The price of that property will be evaluated by the state. Market evaluation would not be factored at all, because this is property that would have perhaps been acquired, unfairly previously. So for purposes of redistribution, the state can expropriate, but it can only take without compensation if the affected person refuses to accept the price offered by the state. So the Constitution has always made provision for that. But what was in dispute were the conditions under which the state could not provide compensation. So which is why I'd also always felt that the process that was initiated, consultation on the change of the Constitution, was all a circus.
Yes.
Because from the very beginning, the Constitution provided for what people were complaining that was not happening.
So I suppose what generally the, let's call them the RET faction, which I kind of dislike the name, but let's just go with it for now. They're using the Constitution as almost the thing to blame bad governance on.
Well, already, because it's an argument that resonates with a number of people. It's fashionable because it relates to Jacob Zuma. Jacob Zuma, they argue, has had unfair judgment passed against him by courts, when in fact we know that Jacob Zuma has legitimate questions to answer, and he actually has been evading going to court. And so, yes, it's not just the Constitution that they are using, but they are appealing to a particular sentiment, to a particular gripe around a personality cult that is Jacob Zuma. So that's the constituency that they are going for. And it's a constituency that you need not have a thoughtful, well-articulated argument, but you simply have to appeal to the emotions. It's demagoguery, it's populism.
Yes. And we shouldn't forget, of course, that Lindiwe Sisulu herself was, in fact, Cyril Ramaphosa's candidate for deputy president in the last elective conference. So she's clearly a flip-flopper and desperately wants the presidency. I think she would stop at nothing. I think she would join the Freedom Front Plus if there was a chance she could become president. So, yeah. I suppose with what you say, the real question is there anybody that actually fits the mold of radical head of, call it the Zuma or the RET faction?
Well, firstly, I think you would have to examine whether that kind of message can win an ANC conference, and even go beyond to say, can it win a majority for the ANC? Because, I mean, part of the reason why the ANC has been, their support has been declining is precisely because of the impropriety and everything else that has surrounded Jacob Zuma during his presidency. And the idea was that we need to move away from that. That is the ANC. That is why Cyril Ramaphosa talks about renewal.
Yes.
And the reason why Didi Mabuza, for instance, at Nasrec in 2007 decided to switch sides and vote for Cyril was because he knew that if they voted for Nkosazana would pretty much be greeted as a continuation of the JZ patronage politics, in which case they would have definitely dropped down quite dramatically. They were lucky to have gotten, what was it, 57?
Yep.
In 2019. So there is that concern that we need to be careful about who we choose, because the public is not pleased with us.
Yes.
At the same time, you have a formidable group within that that feels marginalized. Some of them are in a similar position as Jacob Zuma was. Zweli Mkhize, for instance, who has legal problems now. He wants to be near the circle of power in the hope that he could ward off any legal actions against him. Some of them simply want to retain access to patronage. They want to have a horse in the race,
Yes.
some influence in government, so that they're able to get contracts. And so there are those considerations, but at the same time, ultimately, they realize that there isn't, for them to remain in power, they need someone along Cyril, or perhaps Cyril must remain. But I think the thinking now, to some degree, amongst a number of them, within those who are opposed to Cyril, is that let's leave this chap there. He might keep us in government, possibly, maybe, it's a big maybe, in 2024, and rally for the deputy post, so that when his term expires, then we are in a good position to take the presidency. So no, there isn't anyone suitable enough to herd the RET ticket, because it's not a winning ticket, really.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of evidence that it doesn't resonate with the public. Secondly, you want to remain in power, but make enough noise and get a sufficient number of people who are within your clique into the NEC, possibly into government, so that you maintain some measure of influence within.
And we mustn't forget, I always make the point that South Africa, for all of its failings, has never been an overly radical country. And I use as proof two things. One being the fact that despite all the media attention, the EFF seemingly cannot become a political factor, much like the Conservative Party or the RVB back in the old South Africa struggled to really become a political factor. It just feels to me that South Africa is a lot less radical than what people think we are. And of course, you've got to say the biggest reason why there's a question mark over the radicality of South Africans is the fact that we got through the whole of apartheid without a proper uhuru, if you want to call it that, or an uprising by the people. It's just not within our DNA to really kind of go at it like civil war style, like happened in many other countries.
Predominantly, our politics has always been more at the center. More moderate political culture, moderate leadership, very perhaps elitist politics, reasonable politics, partly because of the leadership, say, of the anti-apartheid struggle.
Yeah.
The educated folks who were pretty much part of the establishment believed in strong institutions, believed in locating or affirming a particular set of norms and values, and crafting your institutions along those norms. So the struggle has always had a very strong ethical foundation.
Yes.
And those kinds of politics were then inculcated quite strongly into our public consciousness. We internalized that, and we always looked, it became our preference, we would look for those kinds of leaders. So the dominant political culture has been centrist.
Yes.
And that foreclosed any possibility of radical politics. That is pre-94 and post-94, of course, where you have huge inequality and unemployment and backlogs in terms of social services, there's always a possibility. That's a fertile ground for demagoguery to thrive. But what the ANC did, to preempt that was then to provide services, social safety network, grants, housing. And I mean, South Africa at some point was provided public housing at the fastest rate than any other developing country. So you could still complain that you didn't have a job, but at the same time you could not accuse, successfully so, accuse the government of being indifferent to your plight. I mean, it's more like a welfare state, how they were introduced in Europe after the Second World War, because you had huge unemployment.
Yes.
So that, and capitalism, a lot of anti-capitalism sentiments. So they said, to save capitalism, yes, you need to make capitalism more caring. So we made the state more caring. We remain on the free market economic path with a very strong element of state intervention, welfare measures. And so that then kept us at the center of politics. And also our culture socially, we are conservative. We grey-haired people like you are taken a lot more seriously. They are fit to lead. Young people, especially those who are prone to rhetoric, to aggressive rhetoric, kind of alienate people. So our social culture and political culture have kind of combined to retain us at the center.
Do you see that changing?
It can change if the status quo remains and worsens, and on the other hand, the political elite appears not to care. So it's all about how the state treats the poor. If there's hope, it's all about hope. That's the phrase I'm looking for. It's all about hope. If there is demonstrable evidence that the state does care still, they provide these things, and there's hope that it will improve. But as soon as people become hopeless, when you lose hope, you're pretty much saying the current system as it exists doesn't work. That's what you are saying.
Right.
And then why keep something that, why should I protect something that does not work for me? It then means that you become open to other alternatives. But so far, the provision of grants, and yes, we are worried that our revenue agent doesn't collect as much as it used to. People have gone out of business, people are unemployed. But the commitment to helping the poor is still there. There's talk of, even now there's talk of basic income grant even. You wonder where we're going to get the money, but the fact that there is talk of taking care of the poor, that alone demonstrates continuing commitment by the state, by the political elite.
Yes.
So that then helps to keep the faith in the system. But if that switches,
yes,
then we might talk a different game altogether.
I suppose that commitment to helping the poor seems to be baked in across the political spectrum. I think it's one of the few things, in South Africa that just about every party agrees. They may disagree about how to go about it, but I don't think there's one of the major parties that's standing up saying, if we were to take over, we would scrap housing, or we would scrap a grant of some description.
Well, I mean, even Tony Leon, I remember at some point supported basic income grant. He might not want to tax business more, but yeah. but he still supports that. So generally, I think there is a belief in this idea that I'm my brother's keeper.
Yes.
And of course, as we experienced it, especially old liberal, community-based liberalism. I grew up in PE, Black Sash, taking care of the poor. And
don't tell me even you can't pronounce Gqeberha.
I'm not a fan of the new. I supported naming it Nelson Mandela City, but that's a very long debate. So So the idea of a caring state, I think, is ingrained across the board. You're quite right, but the difference, of course, is the level of state regulation.
Yes.
And taxation. Yeah, so it's good. You're quite correct in pointing that it's good that we have this welfare idea ingrained in our political system.
Yeah, it just would be nice if, along with that, we also had an ingrained commitment to business, to having an open economy that's easy to transact in. It seems to, we understand that, we experienced the presidency of Jacob Zuma moving that ease of business away from where we are. And do you ever see it returning? Because Cyril Ramaphosa hasn't done it. He's made it more and more difficult by imposing people like Ibrahim Patel on us, and people that seem to would rather die than let the economy grow. I can't quite understand the mindset.
Interestingly, Mike, Patel thinks that 70% of the new jobs will come from the private sector.
Well, he doesn't act like it, does he?
So he ANC being the ANC alliance and multi-class organization, this and that. Now and then you have to make a certain dance. You have to give certain gestures to the left. In Polokwane, the ANC decided that they were going to insist on decent jobs, that limited hours and a certain wage and this and that. And of course, Polokwane was meant to be a leftist takeover of the ANC, and they adopted this decent job business. But a month or two after that, COSATU was complaining to the ANC, to Gwede Mantashe specifically, where are these decent jobs? And Gwede's response was that a job is a job. Yeah. So I don't think at times you must take the rhetoric seriously. Even now, for instance, I was listening to Fikile Mbalula making a statement that the railway line is going to be subsidized, or they're going to go into partnership with the private sector. They're going to be given concessions to run all sorts of, because you have ports that are not working properly. Sadly, you see, Mike, you do need a very strong state, and the state must make its presence felt, perhaps through regulation than ownership. We may argue, for instance, about how much you want to pay people, and at times we might not, for a country that has huge unemployment, one may not be in a strong position to demand high wages. Because South Africa is not the only show in town.
Yes.
Investors can go all over the place. And so what you need is to make labor exploitable for the purpose of increasing employment numbers. There are all sorts of benefits from more people, from more investment. You lift up the rate of employment, there are more companies, the revenue goes up. At some point when you think that you have reached a certain level where you can start making demands, where you think you are a lot more attractive to a number of companies, then you can, make demands. But when you are right at the bottom with very few takers, it's a bit difficult to make demands. So that's where we need to get to. Not make too many demands, realize that we need to get out of this, and so exportation is not a bad thing. Hopefully at some point we will be able to make certain demands. It's the same thing as, last point on this, it's the same thing as parastatals. Well, the argument is that parastatals provide some of the basic services and this and that, which if they were provided by the private sector, they would be a lot more expensive and therefore unaffordable. But at the same time, when you look at them closely, you realize that we are spending more money on maintaining these parastatals. Yes, we are employing people, but what is the net gain? There is no net gain. So what then logically, it means that you have to consider closing down this company, taking whatever you can and invest it elsewhere. Of course, there's going to be a short-term pain by way of people losing jobs, but those people have skills, some of them. Look at the Denel technicians, for instance, and they might be able to find, they might not get jobs immediately, but you are freeing them to get jobs elsewhere. The state is using that money to invest elsewhere. So that gives you the possibility of opening something new, of moving forward. So the pain of the immediate pain is a lot better to deal with than retaining a company that is a drain on government resources, because that stunts creativity. It basically says you don't think there's anything to do, that you can't get yourself out of this quagmire. And that's not how countries move. You take risks, you take unpopular decisions. There will be pain. But the point is, you are taking this decision knowing quite well where you are going, and you are implementing other complementary measures to take you where you want to go.
Prof, it seems to me that there's literally two things that define the ANC. And obviously, you know, the ANC remain dominant, whether they win the next election or not. And even if they lose it, they're still going to be the biggest party. So whether we like it or not, we have to spend a disproportionate amount of time talking about it, because they're going to be in power, whether directly or with somebody else, whether we like it or not. But to me, there's two things that drive the ANC. The one was actually stated by Cyril Ramaphosa when he said that he would rather be seen as a weak president than as a divider of the ANC, right? He said he would rather, basically he said that he would rather under his watch the country goes down the toilet than the unity in the ANC is gone. And that clip is viral and it's there for everybody to see. He doesn't hide that fact. The other fact, I think, is hidden in a bit more diplomatic language. But I would say that it feels to me that the ANC is more driven, is concerned less with high unemployment than what it is with disturbing white wealth. That seems to be the absolute red rag to the bull, right? If there's any chance that the white population, even though it's diminishing, is getting wealthier, the ANC feels they failed. That seems to be the hallmark of all of their policies and actions.
The other ANC is not the whole ANC.
Which part is not
the RET?
I don't know. The RET faction, you know, under Zuma, you felt like he was a little bit less discerning as to who was making money. It seems more the Cyril Ramaphosa crowd that will do everything in their power, you know, that they wouldn't want 6% growth just in case it flowed into the white business owners. There seems to be an obsession within the party.
No, I don't think so. Certainly within certain quarters, within the ANC, those who pretend to be radicals, in fact, are beneficiaries of some of this established white business.
Right.
By the way, through BEE deals, Matabile Dlamini is a fantastic example of that, supporting a company owned by a Frenchman to provide, to help with the provision of grants.
Yes.
And who knows what she got in return. And yet she was purporting to be a radical, supporting black-owned business. So that's all fake. So you have that section that postures quite a lot. But I think generally now, you remember taxation hits everybody hard. I'm talking about taxation because they know that, you know, from people getting more money and you get more tax, and but part of the discomfort perhaps it's not so much with the white wealth, but it's monopolies. I guess that's where your discomfort with Patel partly comes from. I don't know, I'm just guessing.
My discomfort comes from the fact that he's not very good at his job.
Take the Competition Commission. Competition Commission have been investigating the impact of retail companies opening in malls throughout the country. And these are franchise, obviously, owned by a big established company. And the argument has been, as part of localizing, creating local economic activities, is that you must enter into agreements where the local people here who may be producing whatever become suppliers to these big retailers. Because what happens is that once a mall is set up, other businesses around collapse because everybody starts flooding to the mall. And that's white money.
Yes.
And that, of course, simply reproduces white money.
Yes, and I do remember when those very same companies were being scolded for not opening malls in townships. And if I'm not mistaken, that was under President Mandela, when when the township economy was completely owned by the township, and that was used as a hot talking point back in the early 90s as to why there are no malls in the townships. And now,
well, you do allow new money to come in. Of course, you do need new money in the townships to increase the economic activity there. But that new money shouldn't replace existing money.
It shouldn't, no.
So that's where the problem has been. So it's not so much, I think. I mean, there's a concern, Mike. There's a concern that rich white people are leaving the country. When they leave, there's no
replacement.
Yeah, there's no replacement. You look townships.
Yes.
Ratepayers and stuff. A lot of township people don't pay.
Yes.
They are indigents. They get subsidies, and yet the municipality still has to have revenue because the water and electricity that the poor people get is not free. It's subsidized by people on the other side of the rail.
Correct. Yeah.
So
in the other half of that photograph.
Yeah. So there is a concern, even though it's not fashionable politics, perhaps, from certain quarters, because you might seem that you are too close to white people, product of white capital and this and that. But many right-minded people within the ANC understand that you need to sell a certain stake of state-owned to the private sector. But it's part of the contestations. The point is that thoughtless people always make the loudest noise.
Yes.
At times you would think something is obvious. There's no point in you standing on a podium and shouting. Because to you and I, Mike, that's obvious, right? But these ones are making the loudest noise because they are appealing to they want certain things, they are desperate. And so you end up thinking that is the only talk in town. Hence you start thinking that, well, maybe they are more angry with white wealth than they are with unemployment. But it's entirely untrue.
Okay, so let's move a little bit down south. We had our Houses of Parliament burning. It's a great way to sort of see in the new year. What do you think happened? Do you think this was just pure bureaucratic incompetence? Or do you think it's some homeless guy who orchestrated it, or it's terrorism? I mean, it's got to be something.
One of the things I do now and then is to do policy write-up and some research for governments and this and that. And last year I did a bit of work for the Gauteng government, looking at the work of the Premier and how they can coordinate government, and part of that included people from a department that looks at from the build engineering, I don't know if that's the right term, to look at the health of buildings and whether they are well maintained, and they were complaining that government buildings are poorly maintained. The wiring and ventilation
Yes.
and there was a building, they had to vacate, Gauteng government had to vacate a building. I'm not sure if it burned or whatever, but it was declared a risk, unsafe and all that. There's that, and you can go to a municipality elsewhere, you always see these offices are unkept. There are all sorts of things that are kept in an office where they're not supposed to be kept. And I know there are things like buildings burned because of wiring that went wrong.
Yes.
So I'm trying to say I'm not alarmist,
Yes.
right? I don't believe what I hear at face value and know that mistakes are there. These buildings are not maintained. That much I know.
Yeah.
And from poor maintenance, you can easily have fire.
Yes.
That's one thing. But then there's this chap that apparently sneaked into parliament, and there must be video evidence, there must be an investigation. People that deal with fire can tell whether this fire was started deliberately or whether it came from faulty wiring or... So whatever the case is, Mike, I'm fine with it. If they come back saying there was a bomb, then there's a bomb. Then we have to deal with that. But I won't hear say no. There's probably terrorism. Probably. No. I know that there are many other things that could have caused that fire.
I must admit, I know this sounds like quite a strange comparison, but when this poor homeless chap is now being sent for mental observation and terrorism charges are being heaped on him and all sorts of things in a situation that looks like the real reason is just bureaucratic bungling. It really did remind me of a situation. I was sort of like, it triggered something in my brain saying, when have I heard this before? And I seem to recall, even though this was just a tad before my time, but when Hendrik Verwoerd was assassinated in Parliament, an investigation would have been so damaging to the all-powerful National Party at that time. Because how does this guy get this close to the president? Where's security? All the questions that it would have raised would have been so bad that instead they said, the guy was mad, he's being held in a mental institution, he's not even going to go to trial because he's crazy and he did it. Nothing to see here. It's the actions of a guy who was listening to a snake in his stomach. And that's why he stabbed the president or the prime minister at the time. Only because it was just too embarrassing to do a proper investigation. Right? You would have seen 100 different failures as to why that guy was there. And I think we've got the same situation here, where the answer is so embarrassingly basic. You know, in the case of Tsofendis, when he stabbed Verwoerd, he must have failed. He passed the security test. He shouldn't. Somebody didn't do a background check, etc., etc. You can heap up all of the mistakes. Ends up with the prime minister getting assassinated, and I think the same thing happens. Parliament burns down because this guy didn't do his job, that person didn't do their job, blah blah blah. And it's just easier to blame it on the guy. And in fact, we're not just going to blame it on him. We're going to say he did it and he's mad, therefore no trial, nothing to see here, it's over.
9/11.
Exactly.
In the United States. There were these conversations happening that the CIA, some of their operatives recorded. But they never followed up. Recently, with Trump encouraging a mob to invade Parliament in the U.S., they thought, well, they won't do it, so they didn't put up proper security. You know, so those little things, because you don't think that something like that can happen, and people become complacent.
But as you say, it's somebody's job. They don't want to lose their job, so it's easier not to have the inquiry. Prof, I want to touch on something. In my introduction, I was so impressed with the great work you did around the local government elections. And, you know, to me, it was a big story. And there's two things that have emerged, in my opinion, from the local government elections, other than a really bad outcome for the ANC slipping below 50%, which I think surprised everybody, even the people that are not necessarily positively disposed to the ANC. This was a real wake-up call for them. But all of these coalitions that have been formed, you know, that election was held in November. By the time they sat down to form councils, etc., we were into the Christmas break, and it's all gone a little bit quiet. It's starting to heat up again. Do you think those coalitions are going to hold? Do you think it's going to result in decent local governance?
If the previous 5 years is anything to go by, then they are unlikely to hold. Because you have parties there. I mean, one-person party, two-seats party. This councillor has no confidence whether she or he will come back after the next local government elections. So they're all about building a nest for themselves. And what that means is that you go with the highest offer. Don King used to say, boxing promoter, that you must always leave the ring with the champion. So today they'll go with this party that is wooing them into a coalition. They get offered something. They get offered a portfolio that has access to contracts, many contracts. Their people get employed. Then after a while, you know, their partners start complaining that you're stealing too much. I mean, you know, you're embarrassing us. The ANC, that's what the ANC did the last time with Patriotic Alliance, when Patriotic Alliance was messing up in their economic development portfolio with City Deep Market and hounded all sorts of people because they wanted their money, their hands onto the kitty. So the ANC complained, no. It's too obvious now that you're messing up. I think you have to leave, right? And unfortunately now they've had to invite them back because the ANC is desperate in many municipalities. And what Gayton McKenzie said, the first thing he said when he got deals as mayor, deputy, also as what, he said, we want jobs and money for our people. You know, I think what he means by that is exactly what they did at City Deep the last time around. So you are going to have a lot of that. Then you have the EFF being in partnership or supporting the DA in a number of metros. The EFF has this thing that they are power brokers. They can make or break governments. So, and they are unhappy at not making headlines for a considerable period of time. They always want to make headlines because they want people to know that they can influence things. They are important. So if it's quiet, it's bad for them. It's bad business for the party. So they now have to look for distinguishers, right? Something that sets them apart. So they can start a fight, some BS fight, over nothing. Just so that the EFF can be back in the news and be seen to be doing something. So you are going to have a lot of that. And the DA was not entirely honest when they said they did not want the votes of the EFF. There are metros here where they knew that they could not win without the EFF, but they put up candidates anyway.
Yeah,
because they were still hoping.
Yes.
So they've got themselves into this tricky, dicey situation, and the EFF will come back wanting to be seen, create distinguishers, and so you are going to have a lot of instability.
Do you not think that the political climate has changed, and because there's real power up for grabs in the general election coming up in 2024, where such a magnifying glass is going to be placed on those that disrupt rather than build, rather than deliver? Do you not think that might help to keep these coalitions together, or people doing a better job than what they have been doing?
At the back of their minds, they have that, but at times they get taken over by, you know, the immediacy of the moments, the here and now, what they want now, and forget the bigger picture. That's why you have in the ANC this thing with Lindiwe Sisulu.
Yes.
How can she be talking like this when you have national elections now? But she's thinking about herself and where she wants herself. So she's not thinking about of the public good, of the state of the party. generally. So the short-term, self-centered decisions now and then creep in. There's no telling whether at some point one becomes conscious of the bigger. So it's a delicate balance, because you have to weigh your self-interest against the party interests. So yes, a rational thinking person like you would have that kind of logic. But for these politicians, it doesn't always work that way.
Do you think there's any significance in the announcement in December of the formal coalition between the DA, the Action SA, COPE, Freedom Front Plus, etc., Inkatha? Do you think that is politically significant or not really?
It is. It helps. But you've had coalitions collapsing even though they had agreements. Nelson Mandela Bay coalition, they had an agreement under Trollip. But that government collapsed anyway. So it's about enforceability of that agreement. And always sticking to the terms of the agreement, making sure that there isn't one party that feels aggrieved or something like that. So sticking to the agreement, and as and when you have disputes arising, how do you resolve that? You know, people are very finicky. At times, politicians pull out because they feel disrespected.
Yes.
Over very minor things, yeah. So you need consistently to make sure that you are careful about what you say to the next person. You stick to the agreement, and there's continuous discussion. So you may have an agreement, but sticking by that agreement is something, it's a different challenge altogether, because it's 5 years.
Yeah.
Sometimes, you know, you say, take something lightly, say something, and not knowing that the other guy feels disrespected. And small parties are very sensitive. We might be a one-man party, but we can't disrespect us. You know, major parties holding conferences all alone, claiming credit. That can alienate small parties. So there's this constant necessity for consultation and making sure that you share the credit, you see. And for politicians, that's something very difficult to do.
Well, we can only hope that with that particular coalition, that you've got the knowledge of what happened 5 years ago. You know not to deal with Bantu Holomisa, for example. You know not to deal with Gayton McKenzie, for example. They seem to have now learned those tricks. So let's hope that those coalitions, that coalition does become a political force, because it could become a real factor, I think, in South African politics, because it gives a lot of people a potential home.
Yeah.
You know, there's a lot of black people uncomfortable voting for the DA, but they may be comfortable voting for Inkatha or Action SA.
Yeah.
So we'll have to see. But Prof, I'd like to thank you so much for spending your time with us today. It was really fantastic. We could carry on forever, but people have to get to work. Please, you have to get to work to create tax so that the government can spend it wisely, as they've been doing for the last 20 years. Professor Mcebisi Nhlatyana, thank you so much for being our guest today. It's been fantastic to have you on the State of the Nation. We're definitely going to get you back. Thank you so much for your day, for joining us today, and we'll see all of you again soon. Thank you for joining us on the State of the Nation.